Hey, mama friend. Welcome back to another awesome episode of the Mama Mindset podcast. And as always, I'm your host and creator, Amy Cothran. Thank you so much for joining me again today. I am so excited to introduce you to this next guest. Her name is Jennifer Weissner, and she is absolutely an expert in her field. She's a certified sex therapist, and in the episode, she'll give us an introduction to who she is, what she does, and how she is involved in our communities and can be involved in our families. Her knowledge on raising sexually healthy children, which, by the way, is also one of her workshops, is so incredible. This conversation that I have with her touches on the who, the what, the why, and the where of raising sexually healthy children, the importance of that. And because how is such a big conversation to have, we've actually divided this podcast up into two parts. So the first episode is the one that you're about to hear now. The second episode is the one that will be coming out next week. So stay tuned for that, because today we give you kind of the background on this, why it's important. And then in the next episode, part 2, Jennifer really dives into the how. How do we have these conversations with our children? So grab a cozy beverage and join me with Jennifer Weissner in this conversational journey. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me, Amy. I'm grateful.
Yes, absolutely. I have a page of notes. I have a page of questions for you. So I'm really looking forward to the fact that we're going to, you have so much to share and you have so much to offer. I'm really looking forward to the fact that we're going to kind of break this into a 2-part episode today, focusing on the who you are, what you do, and why this conversation is so incredibly important for us as moms, because that's who we talk to on the podcast, but parents in general, why this conversation is so important to have. I mean, this is not a conversation us moms are having at playdates, right? And this is the conversation that as parents, we're struggling to have even amongst ourselves with our partners. So I think the insight and the knowledge and the expertise that you can bring is going to be incredibly helpful. So if you could take a minute and introduce yourself and your background, I would really appreciate that.
Sure. I'm happy to do that. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm also an American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists certified sex therapist. So that's AASECT. And I'm a presenter, I'm a writer, and in 2012, I was the only female certified sex therapist in the whole state of Maine. Now there are 3 others. And so I had to become kind of a jack of all trades very early because there wasn't many of us. And I have a private therapy practice and a consultation practice. I see couples, I see groups and adult individuals, and I also create the popular Raising Sexually Healthy Children workshops. And my passion is educating parents, medical providers, educators, and anyone who really influences youth on how to talk to kids and teens about healthy sexuality, and that it's a normal part of life and an integral part of their lives. I do a lot of public speaking at hospitals and institutions. And I also do, for people across the United States, I do non-therapy sexual health consultations, almost like sex ed for adults, because we don't know what we need to know even as adults. And so I provide those as well. And I also am a co-creator of Girls on Fire, which is a 1-day annual event for 14 to 18-year-old female identified folks to, again, provide them with the information that is integral to knowing their bodies, consent, and relationships. And I consider myself a superhero for healthy sexuality anywhere, and I throw on my cape wherever it's needed. And I have a partner of 25 years who supports the work that I do, and my 2 sons who I adore and who have been my guinea pigs through all of this. And now they are teenagers, and it's worked out pretty well.
That's amazing. Your workshops sound phenomenal. And the Girls on Fire sounds like, to me, it sounds like kind of that missing link and sort of that support between parents and teenage girls. Am I kind of correct in that, where we're kind of fumbling around with our conversations to have with them, and you just have that conversation almost for parents and with parents.
Yeah, we even provide before the program starts. We even do an hour long with any parents or guardians who want to come, and we talk to them about what we're going to talk about and how important, again, these conversations are, and that they be having them at home. So we try to integrate everybody into that.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So all of your childhood, you wanted to be a sex therapist, right? This was like your dream job.
Since I was 5.
Yeah, right. So could you tell
didn't even know what that was.
Yeah, this is amazing to me. So could you tell us how you got on this journey and on this path? I know the story. I've heard this story, and it is phenomenal. So could you share with the listeners how you got started on this incredible journey?
Sure. Thank you. It's a story I love to tell, because every time it gives me goosebumps, and usually tends to give others goosebumps too. But probably early in my career here in Maine, because I moved up from New Jersey, I got invited to a workshop by another clinician. And I'm just a social worker. I didn't even care what it was about. I just went to be social. And when I got there, a very well-known, highly regarded sex therapist out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, was the presenter. And I was blown away. She was talking about the intersection of sexuality and spirituality, which, to me, growing up, 12 years of Catholic school, those things never occupied the same building. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was mind blowing. And so I just felt, I have chronic Lyme disease. So I actually thought I was getting sick, because I felt like sick to my stomach. I was getting the sweats, and then I was feeling cold, and the hair on the back of my neck was going up. And we went out to lunch, and I was super excited to talk about what we were talking about in this workshop. And I thought everyone else would be too, and went out with this group, and they all were like, "What do you want for lunch?" And nobody was talking about it.
And you're like, oh my gosh, like, I have so many questions and so much to share.
I have so much to say. And so I realized, like, oh, I'm the only one having this experience. Mm-hmm. And so went back after lunch, and this gentleman was there, an older gentleman, and he came up to me and he said, "It looks like you're having some sort of experience today." And I said, yeah. And it just started coming out. We were talking, because we had about 15 minutes left of the break. And by the end, he looked at me and said, so I'm 67 years old, and I'm the only certified sex therapist in the state of Maine. He said, if I retire, all of my learning will go with me. Why don't you take it all over from me?
Oh my goodness.
What?
Your first workshop ever. And this is offered to you. Wow.
Right. And this was the moment, and now I know epiphanies exist, because I just extended my hand. Mm-hmm. And I shook his hand. I had babies at home. I had a brand new private practice that, well, it wasn't so new then by then, but I didn't even have an idea what it meant or how I would do it. But the yes was there. Mm-hmm. And it came out of my mouth almost without me realizing it. And by that weekend, I was in that very well-known sex therapist home in Cambridge, Mass, meeting other sex therapists. And I then started the 4-year journey. It took me 4 years to get certified, just because there's no opportunities here in Maine. So I had to piecemeal put all these little pieces together myself. So It was a huge growth experience for me to take something on that I had no idea what I was doing. Plus, as a mother of small children, it was a lot. And by the almost 4 years later, when I submitted my application, an application that was 500 pages long, that took me an entire weekend to assemble and send out in a package this big, I got certified. And so it was, epiphanies exist, and they change your lives. And if you have the courage to say yes, I still to this day don't know where that came from, but I'm not going to I will not question it.
No, because you're just helping. Like you said, you call yourself the superhero, or consider yourself the superhero, because you're helping so many people. Just in the conversation that you and I had ahead of time a few weeks ago, I mean, it completely shifted my mindset in how I talked to the girls. And I can't imagine the impact that your workshops have on parents and children. So the fact that you listened to that epiphany is literally bettering our world. It's literally bettering
Oh,
our
thank you.
communities. It's just, I mean, all the goosebumps, all the feels, because that's so powerful. And I want to go back a little bit and dive into something that you were talking about in that workshop. They were talking about healthy sexuality within spirituality and how the two kind of emerge, right? Or merge together, not emerge, excuse me,
Yeah.
merge together. And so for you, I'm totally blown away with this aspect that you were Catholic. You grew up in a Catholic family, and so very, very religious, very spiritual, but you embraced this calling. So what did that look like for you in your personal life and your spiritual life as well?
I think for me, because the fact is, I mean, Catholicism and most lines of Christianity are extremely sex negative. It just is a
Mhm.
fact. We can't avoid it. And it's oppressive. And once I started learning, I realized just how it was difficult for me to reconcile my Catholic faith with sexuality, but it didn't mean that I was not spiritual. And that was, I think, something that was a really important lesson for me to learn, is how to update and upgrade my relationship with higher being and anyone's sexuality. And one thing I forgot to mention is that right now, actually last year, I began to become certified as a sex and faith counselor.
Mm.
And it is through the Incarnation Institute of Sex and Faith. And I am now this summer in level 2, currently this summer. And what it is for folks who want to hold on to their faith, but again, like I said, have it be sex positive and upgraded, and actually learn about scripture in a way that is more rooted in reality versus myth, and versus uh, the misrepresentations that a lot of the Bible readings have come across. And so learning all about scripture, the reading that I'm doing is just phenomenal. And then also learning how faith can be to be fully inclusive of all beings. And so that's what happened for me, was I just decided in my own spirituality that I would no longer be affiliated and be a part of any organizations that were not fully inclusive of all people.
Mhm.
And so what that did was, because I actually had a high respect for the Catholic faith, but what I did know is I could no longer call myself Catholic, because
Mhm.
I no longer was fully following the doctrine that faith provides. So I consider myself more of probably a Unitarian, more of that bent now.
Mhm.
So, but what Gina Ogden, who is that sex therapist, I then did training with her for a couple of years. What her realizations were is that our sexuality is deeply rooted within and connected to our deepest desires, our deepest creativity, our deepest sense of self. And when we have that deep, deep connection, we can have this sort of transcendence of sexuality into spirituality.
Mm.
And so that was what I learned from her. And there's a whole model that you use with folks, and I use that model sometimes with folks, that basically, if you're physical, you're mental, you're spiritual, and you're emotional, if you are fully integrated in those, you have access to your sexual self. And again, then that transcendence into spirituality.
Mm.
And so yeah, that's a little bit of that journey.
That's amazing, because I'm really glad that you touched on that and you answered that so clearly, because a lot of my listeners are stay-at-home moms. A lot of them have a very strong faith, a strong religious faith. I have talked on my podcast that I am more spiritual than religious, and I've never been religious, but I believe in this higher power. But a lot of my listeners are very religious and they have very strong Christian beliefs. And so I think it's very important to talk about openly the, I don't know, what's the word I'm trying to use? The okayness of healthy sexuality and sex in the home, and talking about that with our children while still being conservative or religious or whatever term you want to call that. It shouldn't be shunned. I don't feel like it should be not discussed, because then we have these children that go into society completely unprepared. And I know that you've talked about it before, the importance of us as parents, that the fact that it's our duty, it is our job to have these conversations with our children, regardless of your faith, regardless of your
Absolutely.
spirituality. So I think it's very interesting, you coming from a background in Catholicism, the Catholic, and now bringing this to the table and merging the two together is, I think, really important. And we need to have that conversation more often.
Right. Yeah. And the way that I present my workshops when I do them is that I'm not here to discuss your values. I'm not here to give you my values or to tell you what your values should be. What I'm here to do is present information, research, literature, some conventional norms, some of which we want to move away from, some we want to move towards. And it's then up to the parent to have those conversations with their children. And if they are going to overlay with their values, make sure that, and religious values, then make sure that your child understands why they exist. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, it's just like what I learned is don't,
Right.
just don't. Or that's, be a lady, or good girls don't, like those kind of things. They don't tell children anything. If anything, they instill fear, shame, guilt, none of which we want. And so really what I say is, if we're going to, if you want your child to understand or to be able to reconcile their sexuality and their religion in a healthy way, we need to explain to them why it is that we are putting certain restrictions or values on certain behaviors. Because otherwise they're hearing different things out in culture, and they're going to have to make decisions about that. And if you want them to make decisions based on faith, then we need to be able to explain to them why. Right. And that was another reason I'm doing this sex and faith, is if I'm going to sit there and help someone be able to reconcile their sexuality and their spirituality, I need to have that information, that both biblical as well as spiritual rooting, other than just my Catholicism background, to help them do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so interested in this training that you're doing. I think it's fascinating. So my hat goes off to you. I think that's a great way for you to add to your already large repertoire of experience and expertise. I think it's amazing to be able to bring that, that certification and that an official certification, to the table, besides your background. But your background in and of itself is incredibly powerful in these conversations that you have. You mentioned something earlier about like the sex silence, and in other articles that you've been involved in and other podcast episodes, you've talked about this idea that in our society, there's this sex saturated society, but then we're also silencing the sex conversation. And that's such a conflicting thought. And so could you touch on that a little bit more?
Sure. Can you imagine what it is for a child?
No, I mean, as an adult,
it's
I'm
messy.
like, you're so right. I mean, you're like you said, messy. It's so messy and confusing as hell. I mean, as adults right now, we grew up with this, right? We grew up in, even when I was a kid, a sex saturated society. That was kind of, to me, like the start of it, when like the 90s for me. I mean, and maybe it was before that too, but then it was always, no, not allowed. Don't do that. Don't think about that. Don't talk about it. Like, I mean, so what's your take on that? What has been your observation of that with parents and children?
So yeah, just the sex saturation of everything that is around us in media and culture. And then yet we're not talking about it at home, or we, like you said, we silence the conversations or say, oh, we don't talk about that. Or because then it becomes, well, where does one talk about this? And where does one get their information? And for something that, back to your rooting in faith for some of your listeners, it's like, God created, if you believe in God, God created beings in his image and deemed them, quote, good. And therefore, part of our being is our sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And so then how can we say that that's not something that's important or integral to who we are as human beings, something that God created? So, going back to that idea of our bodies are healthy and are good and not something to be shameful of. Therefore, why are we not talking about it? Why do we talk about feet and toes and we don't call this a bendy? We call it an elbow. Why would we call another part of our body something else?
Mm-hmm.
We have to, it's sadly, there's all kinds of things. There's patriarchy, there's privilege, there's, we could go on and on about the things that are oppressive. But the fact remains, we as parents need to do this job because we send kids then into the world, like you said, not prepared for what's there. And I can tell you, when kids go away to college, because I know I do this with colleges, their freshman year, they're going to participate in their first sex week at college, which is basically a week long about healthy sexuality. And there'll be classes on kink and classes on anal sex and oral sex. And if we haven't prepared them for that, that's going to be quite a culture shock. And by that time, it's so late in the game. We start consent and body part talk at age 2. That's where it really needs to begin.
In a healthy, age appropriate way. I think people get like really freaked out when we start talking about that, but there's a way to do it in a very healthy and appropriate way. And I think going back to what you were saying before in this idea of the sex saturated culture, but then we're silencing that conversation. And I think that comes down to fear amongst parents and a lack of education within ourselves. I think, in my opinion, and you can jump in here anytime, correct me, but I think parents are so afraid that if we have this conversation, kids are going to go out, teenagers are going to go out and want to have sex and explore all of their sexuality and do things like that. However, so we're like, okay, if we don't have the conversation, nobody's ever going to have sex, which is horseshit because
it's wrong. It's just, there's no, not only the literature says otherwise, that the kids who have the information and who have gotten some good comprehensive sex education actually wait longer.
Right.
So it's the opposite.
Right. Yeah. So what's the statistic right now? Do you know the percentage? I didn't look this up, but what's the percentage of like high school seniors that are graduating that are already sexually active in some way?
Oh, it's high. I think if I don't remember don't quote me on this, but it's like probably, I think it's junior year, like around 70% have already been sexually active.
Almost 3/4 of our teenagers are already sexually active in some way, but yet as parents, we're not having the conversation with them. So we're not having the conversations with them in hopes of them not becoming sexually active too early, and they're still becoming sexually active.
Right.
Hello.
And I think you're, like you said, your listeners, they think that, whether it's me as a sex therapist or sex educators or talking about, like, we're talking about sex. Well, at age 2, we're not talking 3, 4, 5, 6. We're not talking about sex. We're talking about, these are your body parts and I call body joy and body love. How to treat, if we want kids to act responsibly and carefully with their sexuality, what we do then is teach them how amazing it is. Because when we teach them how amazing it is, they will know internally, have this intuitive sense that their body is good and healthy and something to be cared about and celebrated. So when something coercive or dangerous or manipulative comes at them, they will know what good feels like and recognize what bad. The problem is we teach in reverse in sex education. We teach all the bad stuff. We teach everything to be afraid of. And a lot of parents do this. And what we know is that just is confusing, and it does not give them information that they need. It just, like as one wonderful teenager said in Girls on Fire, I was only taught no, but I have no idea what it's like or when I should ever say yes. To me, that exemplifies that whole statement. If we're not teaching about what does a yes look like, what is healthy sexuality, what is it like to consider to share your body with someone else at some point in your life, what are the qualities of that? When we never talk about that, to me, and you've heard me say this, it is criminal for
Right.
parents to put children in adolescent and young adult bodies without this information. It's we don't put them in cars without driver's ed. We don't put them in a lake to swim without swimmies or swim lessons. Why do we let them go into adolescence without everything that they need to be healthy and happy in their bodies?
Yeah. And you touched on something really important, and I want to kind of dive into that a little bit more. But this healthy sexuality, we've been kind of talking about it in terms of sex, right? But healthy sexuality is also understanding your, like you said, your own body and what feels good to you. So when you're
Right.
talking about this with a 4, 5, 6 year old or whatever, a 2 year old even, I mean, you're not talking about it in terms of sharing their body with anybody else other
Right.
than creating
No.
boundaries, but you're talking about their own individual sexuality and their own bodies and being confident within their own bodies. And I just think that that is so important, because I think a lot of times when we start having this conversation, people are like, I can't talk about sex with my 5 year old. And it's like, hold
'Cause you're
on a
not.
second. We're not going to talk about having sex with 5 year olds. Like, that's not this conversation. This is about bringing a self-awareness to each child and knowing who they are and how their body works and why it works that way in an age appropriate way.
Right, right. And what's
Yeah.
wonderful is there are many resources that I use out there that lay it out developmentally. So it makes it easy. So it's sort of, oh, this book is for 4 to 7 year olds. This one's for 7 to 10. This one's for 10 and up. And it provides a wonderful opportunity to have that developmental stage that your child is in, a resource specifically for them and for you, which is great.
So you were talking about school and sex ed within the schools. And this is a kind of a question and a conversation I want to have with you on a very personal level, because we're homeschooling. So, which I love, because we are able to have this conversation, which we need to be incredibly intentional about, right? Because we're not relying on the schools for this. But what I want to touch on is the fact that I think a lot of parents are relying on the schools to have this conversation for them.
Right.
But what the school is missing, and you've talked about this a little bit, a very integral piece of this is the personal values within the home.
Right. Right.
That piece is missing.
Exactly. It's missing. And we have a couple of things. One, thank goodness that schools provide it as a safety net, but that's really what it should be viewed as. It is a catch net that provides the bare. And it actually, in many states, it provides nothing. And in some states, it provides some and not others. I think there's like 26 states that, actually mandate sex education, or I forget the number, but it's something like that. And so some states provide none. But what we know is that it has to happen much earlier, and it needs to happen in the home. So so parents and guardians have the opportunity to overlay their values that they want to instill. And again, if your values are if they clash with the conventional literature about what is sexually healthy, then really making sure that as a parent, you know your values, your beliefs, and you're able to explain them in a very clear way to your child. Because remember, your child is out in the world and out with media and exposed to other children. And so if you want your child to hopefully follow your values, you really have to be able to explain them. I think sometimes, we think like they just should. Well, they're not going to, not without some good, clear explanation of why you want me to do this or not do that. So really getting good with your own values. What I like to say is most of us don't consult our values from because we haven't had children, and now we have children. It's like, oh, do I still want to abide by what I grew up with? Most people say no in my workshops. Out of the two 1,000 plus people that have gone through my Raising Sexually Healthy Children workshops, when I ask that question about what kind of education that they received in the home, do they want it to be different? 90+% will say, absolutely, I don't want it to be anything like what happened in my home because it was pretty awful, or there was none, or it was negative. So really checking in. I actually have a document that I call the touch document. It's about getting in touch with yourself and your values and your partner, if you have one, in order to be able to have conversations with kids.
I love that. So who in the household, do you suggest females talk to their daughters, moms talk to daughters, dads talk to sons? What does that look like? Yeah.
I don't know that every household has a luxury to be able to do that, nor do I think it would be a luxury, because just statistically, most will probably be in a relationship with someone who identifies differently than them. And so wouldn't it, if you have, if there's, say, a mom and a dad in the home, wouldn't we want both partners' input, because you want all of that essence to be a part of your child and who they become? If you're two moms in the household, you still have, or two dads, you still have different approaches probably to sexuality. And don't you want your child to have both of those essences? The reality is sometimes there's a divorced household, or there's one parent who's like, no, thanks, I'm not doing it. It's all you if you want to do it. So we don't have that luxury to say, oh, well, this one should talk to this one. I think it's great. Just like I say, kids should understand the full spectrum of the changes of sexuality in both male and female. It's super important that we have empathy for those who are different than us, for what they're going through. I did that with my own sons.
I love that. And you as the mother, actually, your sons come to you and talk to you about this. And so what I see within your workshops and in your clinics like that, I see it primarily female. So it doesn't matter if you have daughters or sons. Statistically speaking, a lot of these conversations seem like they're coming from the mothers or from women.
Well, that's what the literature bears out. The sex ed literature and research shows that moms are doing the heavy emotional lifting with that, the heavy lifting around doing sex education. And there's, all kinds of reasons why. I've even looked at that in my workshops, to your point, that how I have probably, I'm actually having some of this data run right now with a student, but that, the majority of participants, meaning well over probably 1,800 of those 2,000 are women. So even showing up in my own workshops, and again, there's all kinds of reasons for that. But what we do know, and because I did a program for fathers specifically through an organization here called Maine Boys to Men, about the importance of fathers in the conversations about sexuality. There's actually a study done by Linda Nielsen through the I think it's IFS Institute, about basically the father, what I call the well-fathered daughter, is where fathers that really hang in there with their daughters, meaning through puberty, where some fathers tend to take a step back, if they can really hang in there through puberty, make sure that they are a part of her life and really be attuned to her needs, that through the research, they saw that actually they saw a delay in first debut of sexual intercourse. They saw, I think, higher education, better jobs, better relationship satisfaction, like all these things came out of that. And I'm like, if that isn't, a billboard for fathers to be a part of this, it's just super important. And also, again, what if one partner isn't around anymore? Can that other partner pick up this conversation that's so important?
Yeah. Brad and I have had that conversation, because we have 3 daughters. And so I talked to them about a lot of stuff, but I've told him, and he knows this. And so we are just very open in communicating that. But I said, if I'm not here, I don't like to talk. It's so morbid to have that conversation, but it's a reality of life. Sure. You never know what could happen. I don't want him to be kind of caught in this oh shit moment. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to respond. And I think in some ways we kind of all approach things in that way. We're a little timid, but then you still have to, as a parent, do the brave thing and have those conversations. And so
Right.
instead of, yeah, leaning on the moms, the females in the relationship, I've told Brad, you really have to be prepared to have that conversation. Also, you never know what could happen if I'm gone. Maybe I am gone for a weekend or something, and he needs to have a conversation with one of the girls
Right.
about it. You just need to be prepared. And
Need to be prepared.
yeah, and that's part of fostering a healthy relationship with your children, regardless if you're a father or a mother. You need to be ready for all, because you never know also who your child is going to be comfortable with come, especially their teenage years, and they want to sit down with somebody. You just never know.
Right.
I mean, dads could be really shocked in a moment where they're like, well, that's why you have your mother. Why are you coming to me? We haven't had this conversation. But maybe their daughters are more comfortable for whatever reason having that conversation with their dads. Or
And you're right about that. As someone who has teenagers, I've and of course as a therapist, I notice these things, but my sons sort of, where I was the primary for they would come to me for many things. And then I've noticed in their teenage years, somehow I'm not smart anymore about things. And so
Mhm.
they go now to my husband. And
Mm.
so knowing that ebbs and that flows, and still though, when it comes to relationships and bodies, yes, they come to me. But for households where that's happening, I think you and I had talked about that, making statements like, well, your dad and I, are always here to talk about that. Or, if I'm not here, you could always have that conversation with dad or mom. Like making
Mm.
sure that I always make sure that we are a united front in that way, and that my partner is ready and able to take over those conversations. And you know what? We as parents, we have to do hard things all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so that's just what we have to do. The other thing I just wanted to say about is that the other really important thing is that, for whether it's moms talking to sons or dads talking to daughters, or vice versa, is that it's really important to practice having these conversations with our kids, especially in the mixed gender, because where else are they going to learn the skills of being able to talk about bodies and sexuality?
Mhm.
The home is the environment where kids learn about relationship. And so if you're all able to freely and comfortably talk about sex and bodies and consent and, all of that stuff, and there's an ease around that, they are going to go into the world being able to have those conversations, which can certainly help with consent, can certainly help with thinking about my yes and my no, those really important conversations about protecting themselves, using condoms or other types of things, like being able to have those conversations,
Mhm.
super important.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think if we're not having those conversations and we're not preparing them for the future, starting at home, where are they going to find that information? They're going to go start
Right.
exploring that themselves. And the thought of that is so scary as
Yeah.
a parent, because we're just immersed in this culture of pornography. And where is a girl going to go find out about her body? Probably a male, somehow, in some way.
Right. That's right. That's how I found out. I always said, I learned about my body through my first boyfriend. And I think
Yeah.
I go back to that all the time and say, again, back to that criminal, that is a criminal offense.
Right.
No one should have to go through that as a young person, and not having that someone else would have to teach me about my body. Like,
Right.
that's just wrong.
Right. And boys, teenage boys, where are they going to find it? Well, I mean, maybe I'm wrong here, but I would assume that the easiest way for them to figure out about all of this is through porn, which is, again,
Right, which we know that is, sadly, I don't even like to put these two things in the same sentence, but it's one of the top educators of youth, and it's not education.
right.
And we can talk about that in the next part of this, about how to talk about that and what it is. But
Mhm.
yeah, that is not where. And sure, if we don't do it, they will go elsewhere.
Right.
Sure, you don't want to do it? Great. Then you have to understand that they will go somewhere else and get that information, most likely the internet, and then most likely that's where they will end up.
Right. And we're not in a society designed to approach this in a very healthy way if it's not coming from their parents, if it's not coming from us. And so, this goes back to the reason why I had you on the episode and had you on the podcast was because this conversation is so important to have at home. And as mothers, especially as stay-at-home moms, we are home all the time, for the most part. Even working moms, it's so important for us as women, parents, but especially stay-at-home moms to know you're around your children. So aside from taking care of the house and keeping the kids alive, it is our duty, it is our job to educate them and raise them to be sexually healthy children. I think that is such a mindset shift from, what we've kind of experienced as parents or when we were children, I
Absolutely.
should
When we were
say.
children.
When we were children.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think just being proactive about it and opening up the dialogue in this way. So maybe the next time I do go to a play date and we're having coffee together, it's more normal and not so taboo to have an open dialogue with another mom on, how are you talking to your children about sexuality and how are you raising healthy, sexually healthy children? I think this shouldn't be such a taboo conversation, but nobody even knows where to start.
Right. And I know where to start.
Exactly.
And whether it's listening to this podcast or, I do consultations with parents all across the US, whether it's a homeschooling group of moms who get together and want to do a workshop, regardless, because it's not the easiest thing to do. Our culture doesn't support it being easy. And so, but what I do is I make it easy and I break it down in a way that's like, this is not rocket science. And once we can get through sort of you said it earlier and you were correct. The number one reason parents don't talk about it is fear. Guess what? It's the same reason why doctors don't talk about it either, is because they are fearful about well, what do I do once they tell me something? They fear their own ignorance about it as well. And so do parents. So this is a universal thing that's happening. And we just need to get over it and get over ourselves for the sake of our children, because a sexually healthy child grows into a sexually healthy adolescent who grows into a sexually healthy adult. And as a sex therapist, every day I sit with people on my couch who sit on my couch who tell me about the shame and the guilt. Many of them have a story, that comes from their childhood around sexuality and being shamed. And we just have to stop it. Shame is something happens to you. You are not born with it. And my goal, my superhero powers is to try to help raise a generation of children who are sexually healthy and go into the world and grow into sexually healthy adults and not have to suffer the way so many adults do.
I love that. I wanted to ask you really quick too. So I think it's important for people to know that you're having these conversations and these workshops and your speaking engagements aren't just directed towards parents and children. You mentioned that you are speaking to doctors. Why would you be talking? I mean, why would you be talking to doctors when we assume that doctors should already understand the human body and understand sex and sexuality but yet they're hiring you or going to conferences where you're speaking to hear your perspective?
Yeah, it's no different than being parents. It's because yes, like you said, they understand the human body, but talking about it, and like a woman coming in and talking about low desire, or a man coming in and talking about his fear around his erectile dysfunction, or those types of things, those are not things that they're comfortable with talking about, or asking their patient what type of sexual behavior are they engaging in, so they can know how to tell them how to protect themselves. If they do not ask those questions, they don't know their patient and they don't know how to help them. I even speak to dentists here in Maine at the University of New England, because guess what? STIs show up in your mouth.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I always say to people, think about your dentist. Put them in your mind's eye. Could you imagine them talking to you about STIs? And most people go, oh my gosh, no way. And it's
No.
like, yeah, that's why. And
Yeah.
interestingly, every year that I do that lecture, out of all of their lectures, their feedback is usually that they love this lecture the best. Out of
Mm.
all the lectures in dental school, they love this because it's something that they never thought about, and they realize how critically important it is. It's also critically important that they know that, you know, when someone is laying back in a dentist chair and someone is leaning over them and having their fingers in your mouth, if 1 in 3, you know, depending if it's male, female, 3 to 6 people have been abused or assaulted in some way, that can be terribly triggering. And that's another thing that dentists never, ever think about. So I bring all that to them. And doctors need to understand, you know, they OBGYN departments have me come in and talk about low desire in women, because it's one of the most difficult things for doctors to talk about, and they don't know what to do about it. And so I do this so I can get more help in this endeavor. You know, only 0.00001% of the population is ever going to see a sex therapist, but they do deserve to see their doctor and have their questions be asked of them about their sexuality, so the doctor can open those conversations with them.
That's so powerful, because it really takes this conversation that we're having, just, you know, as women and as moms, thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. I feel really overwhelmed. Maybe I'm the only one that feels this way. And it's like, no, the entire world feels this way. Literally.
Absolutely.
It is so, it just blows my mind that it's so prominent and so normal for everybody, but yet this taboo topic, like we keep going back to. But if you're speaking to doctors and dentists, you know, healthcare professionals, and so
oncology departments.
yes,
Yeah.
I mean, that just takes this conversation that we're having. And for me, this is kind of personal and just blows it up. And it's like, okay, no, it's okay that I have these questions. It's okay that I want to make sure that I get the correct information and that I'm educated on this so I can teach my children, because I'm not the only one that feels this way. Healthcare professionals and all of the people that you just mentioned are also, you know, I don't want to say struggling, but a lot of them struggling. How do we talk about this? What should I say? You know, and then just that
Absolutely.
educational platform. So I hope that the moms that are listening understand that, you know, we're not alone. This is not just
You're
a
not alone.
parenting issue.
No.
This is just not a female motherly issue. This is a societal issue. You know, this is an issue
Right.
with our entire society. So
Exactly.
I think that's incredibly, to me, that's helpful. You know,
Well, it's
I'm not,
validating.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and again, it really reinforces the importance of us having this conversation over and over again. So, Jennifer, is there anything else that you want to add that I didn't already ask you, or that we didn't already talk about in terms of the importance of this and the why behind creating and educating our children to be sexually healthy in their lives?
Sure. I think the one thing that just, I mean, many things come up, but one thing I think to part with is that I would think that if we asked every parent, do they want their child to grow up into an adult who has a fulfilling, healthy sex life? I think we would all say yes. But there's this gap in between where somehow we have this expectation, but we don't give them any information of how to get there. And so if, you know, yes, you know, a lot of parents will think, yes, I need to talk to them about healthy sexuality to, quote, keep them safe. That's not the way I look at it. I look at it as, we talk about healthy sexuality because it's natural, because it's normative, because it's healthy, and because it's an integral part of who we are. And it's a major function of who we are when we are older. And so therefore, we need to provide that foundation for children of why this is important. And the younger that we start, the easier it is, because it's already then part of the culture of your household to be talking about bodies and talking about functions and what comes out of where and how many parts are here and there. And so we just continue to scaffold that information so we can send them into the world to have fulfilling, healthy sexual relationships as young adults and adults going forward.
I love that. I think that encouraging children, or not children, excuse me, educating them allows them to find pleasure in the future. And I think as women, I'm just going to speak on behalf of women. We struggle with that in our lives to find that pleasure and to be okay in that space with our bodies and how our bodies function. So I thank you for bringing that important piece up because we didn't touch on that. So in our next episode, just so the listeners know, some of the things that I want to cover are basically just our how. We've talked about the why, and we've talked about your incredible background and what you bring to the table, Jennifer, but we're going to have another conversation that is the why, or excuse me, the how behind this, and your tips and your tools. And we're going to talk about terminology, which is incredibly important, using the correct
and
terminology.
how we're going to strike the word virgin from our vocabulary.
Oh, okay. I can't wait to have this conversation with you. Yes.
There's a teaser for everyone.
Yes. Oh gosh. Okay. It's going to be super powerful. So I hope the listeners can marinate on this. Also, in the meantime, between this episode and the next episode, I will put all of Jennifer's contact information in the show notes below. Jennifer, what is the best way that people can reach you if they have questions or they want to sign up for your workshops?
Sure. The best thing to do would be to go to my website, which is just Jennifer Weissner, healthysexuality.com. And I have just so many resources there for folks under the, I think it's under the About Me, and there says interviews and articles. So there's just so much there for folks to be able to read and get an idea of just stuff that I give away, through podcasts and through interviews and articles. And then also they're welcome to send an email through my website and reach out to me. Happy to answer questions, or happy to talk about how I can do a virtual workshop for them and their friends, or do a private parent consultation. Or what happens many times is adults realize sort of what they didn't receive. And they start to realize how much they've missed in terms of sex education growing up, and maybe what they don't know now, or things that are still bothering them. And I do adult consultations as well. So happy to talk about those too with anyone.
You're such an amazing resource for people on so many levels. And I can guarantee if they go to that section on your website and they listen to the podcast that you've been on and read the articles, they're going to want to sign up for your workshops. They're going to want to email you because they're going to have so many other questions. This conversation and your knowledge really gets the gears going for parents and for women. So thank you so much for your expert words of wisdom today. I can't thank you enough. It's really helped me personally. And I hope that the listeners can take this and start having these conversations with their families as well. So stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, Amy. And just thank you for asking all of these questions and bringing this topic out for all these parents and moms at home to be able to put them out in the light where they belong. So thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. I've loved it. So thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome. All right.
Hey, mama friend. Thank you so much for joining me today in this conversational journey with Jennifer Weissner. Like I said in the beginning, her knowledge is so incredible. She is absolutely an expert in this field. And I was so, so happy that she was able to come on to the podcast and share her knowledge with us, with you today. So stay tuned for next week's episode on part 2, which is the how. How do we have these conversations with our children? We've talked today about who Jennifer is, what raising sexually healthy children means, where we should be having these conversations, and why we should be having these conversations. We dove into so much today, but the how is the missing portion of this, which is it needs in its entire own episode, which is why we did a part 2. So in the meantime, I put Jennifer's contact information in the show notes below. Feel free to reach out to her. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions. Also, please don't forget to share this with another mama friend because we all need to be having these conversations with each other and with our children. This needs to be a change. We need to see some change. We need to find the courage and the strength to have these conversations with our children in our homes. So, share this with another mama friend. Also, please don't forget to hop onto iTunes, leave me a rating and review. I cannot explain to you how much that helps us by just sharing this, and leaving a rating and review really helps grow this podcast and helps grow this community, because these conversations are so important and so impactful. You never know who you could impact by just sharing this. So thank you so much for listening today. I look forward to talking to you again soon.